very apt one before we have our meditation session at the end to close. Breaking women's health taboos. And this discusses a whole range of things, and I've actually got a PT, a doctor, and a dietitian on the panel, so we've got every angle covered in this one, which is great. So starting to the far right, we've got one of my best friends who is best-selling author, personal trainer, Women's Health magazine columnist, founder of new ranges in Primark and activewear and doing incredible things, also Women's Aid ambassador, so Alice is doing a lot of very important things. We also have one of my dear, dear friends in the middle there. We have Hala, who's also been on our episode about carbs, which we had on as well, registered dietitian, consultant nutritionist, founder of Nutrition Rocks. You'll have seen her on TV shows quite frequently in the media. And then we have this gorgeous girl here to my right, Dr. Brooke, who is an NHS doctor currently working and training as a registrar in Obstetrics and Gynaecology in London. Now, a lot of you had questions earlier about the pill, about all that sort of thing, and I was like, we've got our girl coming, she's going to be here on the panel. And I think that's probably where we should start, actually. So I was going to start somewhere else, but I think we should go into that first. There was a question earlier, Brooke, before I go on to the topic here. Is it true that it takes a long time for your body to adjust when you come off the pill? What's actually happening with your hormones when you're on female contraceptives?
Yeah. Hello?
Yeah. Hello? Do I need to hold it up? No. Okay. Hi everyone. So, the contraceptive pill is such a big area and it affects your body in a lot of different ways. I guess the first thing that most people are concerned about is if I take the pill for a long time, will it affect my fertility? Will it make me infertile? Will it change anything? And the answer to that one is no. It takes time for your hormone levels and everything to resettle after coming off the pill. You may not have a period for a while after coming off the pill, 6 months, even up to 9 months can happen, and eventually, given enough time, your cycles will regulate, and therefore, once you're ovulating again, your fertility returns. So it shouldn't cause any kind of permanent effect on fertility. But it also does affect your body in a number of other ways. It can have some positive benefits. Many people take the pill for, partly for regulating their cycle if you've got PCOS, also for the skin benefits and that sort of thing. And then there's the negative effects that a lot of people find, like bloating, some abnormal bleeding, things like that. So whichever reasons you stopped taking the pill for, it should all settle back down over time. It shouldn't cause any permanent changes to your hormones. But essentially you are giving yourself an artificial hormone, which is estrogen and progesterone in the combined pill. So when those hormones go away, it does take time for everything to regulate back out again.
Thank you for clarifying that, because I think it's something a lot of women are very, very concerned about. There's lots of myths surrounding that area. And if I go back to Alice, why do you think that women are targeted so frequently about topics that are so taboo? Something we had on the podcast, like the goop kind of, I'm going to say it, Gwyneth Paltrow's vagina steaming. And why do you think that is? Because you get a lot of it as well, being online.
Yeah, I just want to touch on the contraceptive thing because I think it's really interesting. So I spoke with Anita on Monday and that question came up, and I think it's one of the most talked about contraceptives in the fact that it's artificial, and in the fact that also people experience, I guess, the most scaremongering when it comes to taking the pill. And so I think people are, at the moment particularly, really anti kind of anything artificial in their body. They're wanting as much natural stuff as possible. But actually, when we look at something like the contraceptive pill, we never really talk about the positive benefits. I'd also like to say that as someone that is on the contraceptive pill, it can be great and it works for some people, and sometimes it's about finding the right one that works for you. There are over 13, I think, different types of contraceptive pill in this country, which means that if one doesn't work for you, that doesn't necessarily mean that the pill isn't for you. That just means that that particular blend of hormone, progesterone and estrogen isn't for you, but there are others to try.
Because you're very open, Alice, about your experience. It's why I've put Alice here with us today as well, from a fitness perspective, but also the fact that you do have polycystic ovarian syndrome.
Yeah, and also I've had loads of stuff go on with like my periods and stuff. So I have PCOS, and as a kid I had terrible acne, so I was put on the pill at a very young age, and I found that wasn't the right one for me, which meant that I had huge issues with that. So yeah, I've definitely had my own experiences with contraception and also with my hormones in general. But going back to your initial question, something that I think we as women are targeted with is the fact that we are an easy target when it comes to selling us stuff, whereas men are quite basic when it comes to their kind of routine in the bathroom. So if you look at a men's, even my boyfriend, his beauty cabinet is smaller, really minimal, really kind of like soap and maybe a moisturiser if you've got a good one, and maybe an SPF if they're really metrosexual. But when it comes to women, we're told that we need so many things. So we're convinced that all of these things are essential and are a way in which we can sometimes optimize our health. And I think actually, interestingly, with the rise of the wellness industry, it's kind of been co-opted by the gynae kind of world, and it's just another arm in which we're told that there are things we need to do which can somehow make us better and healthier. And I'm going to project. And so when it comes to things like Goop and Gwyneth Paltrow's kind of vaginal eggs, and even things down to, like, I know we discussed in the podcast, Femme Fresh, there's absolutely no evidence to suggest that you need a special type of wash for your bits, basically. And actually it's been shown to do more harm than good. So particularly with cases of things like thrush, it actually irritates further rather than helps. Which I think is a myth that most people aren't aware of. So I just think that we are targeted by big pharma because we're vulnerable targets, and we are more likely to buy those kind of things than men, sadly. And I think it's a real shame.
It is a real shame, isn't it? And I think you've really delved into it nicely there. And if I could pass the mic to Hala, I mean, from a dietitian's perspective, now Hala works with eating disorders, and a lot of your work sees the detrimental impact that our vulnerability and the fact that we're preyed on upon these miracle products. You see it day in, day out. How important is it that we're nourishing our bodies and switching off this outside noise for our long-term health?
I mean, I can't stress enough how essential it is to keep our mental health in a positive state, because the repercussions of developing an eating disorder, at best you might be nutritionally compromised and feel a little bit unwell, but worse. But at worst, you can die. And I have seen patients die. I've seen patients in seriously compromised situations. And I'm talking BMIs, if you consider a healthy BMI between sort of 20 and 25, let's say, as a ballpark figure, I'm talking BMIs of 10 and 15. There is absolutely nothing glamorous about having an eating disorder, and you can die from that. So it's so important for us as women. I'm talking about women because this is where most of the magazines and social media are really pushing us towards. And also with regards to nutrition specifically, we're not saying that every diet is going to cause an eating disorder, but certainly every eating disorder started with restriction and a diet, and that's something that you all need to be aware of and conscious of. If you're not in a good space mentally, you are at risk.
And that in turn affects our hormones and our female health. So I'm sure a correlation you see is eating disorders and developmental things to do with gynecological concerns.
Absolutely, and one of the first things that people notice is that they get irregularities with their periods. So that is actually, you know, a key aspect of good health, you know, and, you know, speaking to your GP, but one of the key factors is, are you eating properly? Are you having a regular meal pattern? Are you eating everything out of all of the food groups and having a balance? And also, have you got a good relationship with food? How often are you thinking about it? Now, there is another condition called orthorexia, which hasn't been specifically classified as an eating disorder, but it's a preoccupation with healthy eating. It's basically when healthy eating goes wrong. And again, with orthorexia, you can still have problems with your periods. So it is something that's very, very crucial, and you have to think, and you must see this as well. Oh, the other aspect is issues around fertility, because that's then the knock-on effect as well. And it's so devastating when you're seeing women later on in life who have had eating disorders in their teens and 20s who cannot now conceive, and it's irreversible. Some of the damage that happens to your bones and your fertility, we cannot do anything about at a late stage, and that's absolutely devastating.
And I think, Brooke, it's something that you must see as well as a GP, you know, being in a surgery. It must be, first of all, very difficult to actually have time, and working in your specific area as well, gynecology. Is it something you pick up on? Are you able to discuss it with your visitors? Obviously, it's not always something you can just come out with.
Yeah, so when we kind of do gynecology clinics in hospitals, we have the luxury of a little bit more time. And often, yeah, someone's been referred maybe because they have very irregular periods, not having any periods at all. And when they come to see us, we often do jump down a very medical route. And actually, it probably is the end of the consultation, if that doctor even reaches that point of asking about diet, unless that you've noticed that someone is very, very underweight. You can actually maintain a normal weight and still not have your periods as a result of the restrictions that you put on yourself, the excessive exercise that often go alongside it. And it's to do with the way that the other hormones in your body, the stress hormones, restrict ovulation from happening, and then you don't see your periods. So yes, we can discuss it and should discuss it really in a gynecology clinic, but my experience is probably a lot of doctors are even scared to go down that route, or don't think of it as a cause, because it's not going to be our kind of medical thing that's going to show up on a scan, but it needs to be talked about more, definitely.
Completely, and there's lots of other female concerns that can be linked, of course, to nutrition and lifestyle, but equally something that is now more common that may not be all the time is endometriosis. And could you explain what that is? And then I'm going to ask Pamela about this.
Yeah, so endometriosis is when the tissue that normally lines your womb grows other places that it shouldn't grow. So it can grow through the lining of the womb, it can also grow in other places like on your ovaries, on your bowels. And it's a condition that mainly leads to two problems, are the main reason that people will present with it. Number one is really, really painful periods. That kind of pain that you can't leave the house when you've got your period, you can't go to work or school, really debilitating and often can't be controlled adequately with the normal painkillers that you would try and take. So that's one symptom that people usually come with, and the other is fertility. And often what can happen is people actually don't know they have endometriosis until it gets to the point when they're trying for a baby, and usually by the point they see a doctor, they've been trying for over a year. And it's one of the things that then can be found later on. So even though they weren't necessarily affected by the period effects, their fertility is affected. And it takes an average of 7.5 years to be diagnosed with endometriosis from when someone first sees a doctor for some concerns to do with women's health. So it's another area that we don't talk about enough. I don't think doctors even have it at the forefront of their mind often enough. And it really, really does have an effect on women's lives.
That's why the conversation around it is so important, and I know that Alice, having an online platform, you're very vocal about sharing things when you get perhaps a particularly heavy period or things that you're unsure about to happen into your body. Do you find there is a demand of people asking you then, what can I do? And you're thinking, well, I need to send all these people somewhere.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think we see Instagram as like another Google portal. So whereas you might go to your GP for advice, it seems much more normal now to reach out to someone online, even though you know nothing about their qualifications or their past experiences sometimes. So I think it's really difficult, and it's a very grey area that needs, I guess, more kind of regulation. But I think that equally, I think people find it quite an uncomfortable subject to bring up with maybe their GP. So reaching out to someone online is a great idea if you're just looking for someone to be turned to. So I think if you feel comfortable enough to message someone like myself, you know, if I get messages like that, the first thing I will say is, well, I think that's amazing that you've had the confidence to come to me and explain that. However, this isn't my scope of practice. I'm going to point you in the direction of X. And I just wanted, I'm so gobby, I have so much to say, but I just wondered if I could circle back to something that Brooke was talking about, which was the fact that you can be a normal weight and not have a period. And I think this is something that came up on a podcast that I did this week, is the subject of overtraining. And I heard a question that was asked earlier about overtraining, and the fact that it wasn't a thing. I find that really problematic. I think this whole messaging around overtraining is something that we're trying to kind of skirt over. Gone is the days when people did exercise 3 times a week. We have this idea that more is always better. And I will see women that come to me as clients and they're doing 6, 7 training sessions a week. Their rest day is a yoga day. Their idea of not doing anything is like still doing something. And we've lost the art of doing nothing. And we've lost the ability to let our bodies properly rest. So then we start to see more and more and more women who are not having periods, or they're having irregular periods, even though they're at a normal body weight, and even though they might be eating in a normal way, because the stress on their body and the ability for their body to recover is so diminished that they're then not able to be in a positive state to produce a baby, basically. The reason why your period stops is because your body tells you, I'm not in a safe and comfortable space to reproduce, and therefore I'm going to stop your period because I'm too concerned about too many other areas being under such stress. So I think it's a massive issue that hasn't really been dug out as much as it needs to be. And I think when Brooke talked about the fact that, you know, our perception of someone that is overtraining or that is in a I guess concerning state is the fact that if their BMI or their body weight is too low, when actually that's really not what we should be looking at. We should be looking at firstly someone's training habits, the way that someone eats. It's not just about as you mentioned, that it's not just about eating disorders, it's about also disordered eating and orthorexia, because those things are just as problematic.
We're seeing, and we're discussing overtraining and under-eating here. Well, actually, the majority of the UK at the moment, we're probably not a very healthy nation. We're not exercising enough. We are perhaps overeating, and this is a generic thing to say. I'm talking about public health nutrition. So equally, Hala, are you seeing as well, I know you work with eating disorders, but they come in all shapes and sizes, and it's very easy to just think about the one extreme. Like Alice said, it is a problem to be overtraining just as much as undertraining.
Yeah, I mean, so eating disorders, we're talking about bulimia nervosa, anorexia nervosa, but also binge eating disorder. You can be overweight, or you can be seemingly recovered on the scales, but that doesn't mean you're well. Okay, because it is also to do with your mental health and your relationship with food and how you interact with the rest of the world. And one thing I also wanted to talk about is, we talked about endometriosis, but women who are having regular periods also need to look at their iron levels, and that's a key factor. So you definitely will have low iron stores if you have endometriosis, but you also run a high risk generally as women of having iron deficiency anemia, and especially as the increase of veganism and vegetarianism has increased. That's fine, but make sure you have a blood test to ensure that your iron stores are where they should be, because you know, our iron stores sort of increase and then they drop as we have the menstrual losses, and so we need to make sure that that's on an even keel, because that can then trigger off other conditions as well.
Completely, and it's also so it's cervical awareness week. Yeah, cervical cancer prevention week. So in terms of all the topics we're discussing here, it's very hard to condense into one panel. Fertility, endometriosis, PCOS, eating disorders, but I'm trying to prove a point that they are interlinked, which is why I've got these different experts here from different backgrounds, because they are all tackling in some shape or form the same thing. And do you say, when you're screening someone, let's say you're talking with a client with an eating disorder, or you're talking with someone that has a poor relationship with food, would you say there's a good relationship between your doctor, between your fitness health professional? Is everyone very interlinked?
Oh, wow.
I know
that's a huge question. I mean, what I tend to find, and actually I've had this experience because I also deal with bariatric patients, so that's the other extreme of severe obesity. And what's very, very depressing is when I have patients come to me who feel listened to for the first time. They didn't get to over 200 kilograms overnight, okay? So where was the conversation with their GP? You know, eat less, move more is not going to cut it. A lack of complete and utter empathy is what so many people experience. And also the other issue as well is if you have got disordered eating or are on the fringes of an eating disorder, or in fact have an eating disorder but you are right weight for height, we have a major problem, because where do you go? your GP is going to potentially, I'm not citing all medics here by the way, but this is something that does need to be addressed, and more education needs to happen with the medical profession specifically, because often they are the first port of call. So just because you are right weight for height, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily well physically and certainly mentally.
No, completely. And if you could expand on that as well, and also talk about the fact that there are services like smear tests and things, and a different remit that does screen for things, but why are people not taking up these opportunities or talking to their doctor?
Yeah, I know. Well, first of all, going back to what Hala was saying before, in an ideal world, yes, all the services should be beautifully linked with each other, and we should all link in nicely, and the GP wants you to see a physiotherapist, and the physiotherapist can send you to a gynaecologist. All would be fantastic, and that is, in theory, how some of the services are set up. But the reality is, things get lost in translation, and I guess the reason that I started my own platform was that I feel as women, we now have to take it upon ourselves. We need to be empowered and we need to be educated. And a lot of it is about learning about your own body, what your body should be doing, and what your body, when something goes wrong. And then knowing who you should seek, and keep pushing until you get the answers that you need. Unfortunately, it shouldn't work that way maybe, but I think find the right people to follow on Instagram, find the right places to get information that is valuable, quality, evidence-based information, and then use that to help guide what goes on in your body. The people that you see on social media can't give you personal advice, but you can learn what you can and then take that to the doctors or take that to the right professionals, and help yourself, I guess, that way.
100%. And to bring the subject a little bit, I'm going to say the word light-hearted, but it's not really light-hearted, because everything here is going to affect all of us in this room. A big woman's health taboo. So we've discussed endometriosis as something we could delve into more. Polycystic ovarian syndrome, we could delve into that more. Eating disorders, huge mental health topic. We need to discuss how long these waiting lists are. But what about really superficial things that seem to be taking up more time, like trying to bust cellulite or picking on female parts of the body as if there's something wrong with us? I mean, Alice, you get online scrutiny as well. You must get asked all the time about how you reduce cellulite in magazine article interviews and things like that.
Yeah, I think it's a massive thing. I think we all have an image in our heads of what the perfect body still looks like, and that's driven by social media, and that's driven by the media itself, and it's driven by all different ways in which we consume other bodies. So if you're only seeing one body type that looks one certain way, then of course you're going to see that as the ideal, and therefore see anything that differs on you from that body type as wrong. And I think it's an issue that is much wider than just social media. I think it goes way back. But I think the influence that social media and the media has on us in general creates this warped idea of what normal looks like. And I think firstly, the issue lies in that there is no such thing as normal. We're all born into very different body types, and if there was one thing that I'd probably say more than anything else in any training session that I've ever done, it's that every single person is unique. So there's no kind of one rule fits all, and I know that's something you feature on the podcast heavily, is that there's no kind of blanket rules when it comes to anything. So some people will be really suited to a certain way of training, some people won't, some people will really suit a certain way of eating, some people won't, and there's no kind of one rule. And the same with our bodies. Some people will experience certain things, some people won't, and that's just the way that we are. We all look different, and I think, I come from an industry where I was conditioned to believe that I had to look a certain way to fit in. And I'm talking about both musical theatre, which was my initial job, and then moving into the fitness industry. And I think that kind of rhetoric is so damaging, and it means that people are constantly feeling, and particularly women, feeling as though they have to change themselves to somehow fit in. And I think the more that we celebrate all different types of bodies, and we see people that look like us. So I love Jamila Jamil, her I Weigh movement, because it showcases different types of bodies. It's not just about you have to look like the woman in the magazine, because the woman in the magazine doesn't even look like the woman in the magazine. So it's really important that we see that, so that we ourselves feel as though we fit in. And I think, that's really important. And I think we're seeing that more. You know, I don't put myself in any category when it comes to body positivity or anything like that. I don't want to co-opt a movement that I don't necessarily speak for, and I think sometimes I find it really difficult because I don't really know where I sit when it comes to all this kind of stuff. I'm sort of a bit fitness, but I want to.
You don't have to. That's
of course.
The point.
And I think sometimes if you put a label on yourself, people expect you to only be a certain way, and I think lots of different things. You know, I talk a lot, and I've got stuff to say, and I think that I'm still discovering what I think, but I would say that one thing I have come to learn by mainly working with women is that we have to start teaching the fact or engaging with the idea that there is no one way to look, and that just because you might have cellulite, it's a completely normal thing.
Completely.
And we need to stop sort of cherry picking parts of our bodies and saying, oh, I don't like this, oh, I don't like that, I wish I had a bigger this, I wish I had a bigger that, and start celebrating that what we have is what we have. And you know, Lawrence said something really interesting earlier, and I loved it, which was like, don't miss out on that time, that period of your life, just to look a little bit different. You know, there's been times in my life where I have made huge sacrifices to look a certain way, and I look back and I kick myself because I missed out on so much, and I will never do that again because I now appreciate how much goes into that, and I think that's definitely something that we need to look at. And,
Thank you. I mean, it's so passionately shared, and you can hear that Alice has been there and knows that there is so much more to add to that. And if Hala, if you could expand on that coming from your field, Stacey, I'm going to ask you all how you've experienced being a female as a health professional and getting information out there. What you've experienced has been tricky, and what you think people actually really need to hear. What changes can happen? What can we do?
I think one of the major issues is when somebody comes to you with a specific idea in their mind. And when we're talking, we're all different. Genetics, you know, our cultural background, you know, where we're from, you know, do we follow our mum's genetics? You know, what is our specific body shape? I run body image workshops very regularly, and I work alongside a stylist that works with a lot of celebrities, people that are in the media. And I didn't know this, but apparently there are 12 universal body shapes. And if you are trying to diet yourself from one body shape, which you are naturally, to another, we have got the potential of an eating disorder, disordered eating, because never in a month of Sundays are you going to be able to change your structural makeup, you know? So it's very, very important to have a very strong sense of self and to have that conversation at the get-go and also manage people's expectations. I remember having a very high-profile client that basically came to me. She had a photo shoot, and about 4 weeks after that initial appointment, she was like, I need to lose 2 stone. First of all, she didn't need to lose 2 stone, she didn't even need to lose 1 stone, right? And secondly, I had to say to her, if this is what you're looking for, I can't look after you. And actually, in actual fact, we did a lot of work around her body image to address that. But when you are in the public eye and you are being vilified, as women are, very, very often, it is really, really important to have a very strong sense of self. I can't stress that enough.
No, that's wonderful, wonderful advice. Just really nourishing yourself and being kinder and compassionate to others. And Brooke, do you think from a perspective of let's go to gynecological things and what is commonly spoken about and not spoken about, what is it you see the most of, and what is it you wish people were more open and honest about?
Yeah, I think as gynecologists we often see the effects of things too late. So 2 things that come to mind straight away, and I'm obviously taking away things like cancer and things like that, just the common things that present to us probably a little bit later than they should are problems with periods, like specifically endometriosis, and also like things like incontinence. And people, I'm not saying that every single person should, every conversation let's talk about wetting ourselves, but I think as women we kind of laugh things off. There's a lot of pressure on society at the moment to be the woman that does it all, to be seen to have your kids, get your body back, get straight back to work, manage to combine perfectly working with bringing up a family and having a business and everything else. And so we're not really given the kind of time to say, this is really hard because I have my periods are really, really affecting me, or ever since I had my children I do leak a bit of wee when I run, so I've stopped running because I can't really do that, rather than kind of speaking about it with each other, recognising what is normal and what isn't normal, and then kind of seeking help early enough. That's what I wish people would come to us a little bit earlier, and that way we can help quicker.
No, very, very good advice. Now I'm going to open the floor because I know there's probably lots of questions, and this is, I realise, a large space to be intimate, but I think it's important while you've got these experts on the panel here, it's a good opportunity. Is there any questions?
Hello, so I am currently in recovery from an eating disorder, and I lost my periods for a really long time, and I've always wanted to be a mum, but I was wondering if there was anything I could do, like almost damage control, like just improve my chances if I did decide to in the future.
First of all, thank you very much for sharing that. That is incredibly brave. Okay, that's the first thing. Secondly, take it easy on yourself. Okay, you have to take each day as it comes. Make sure you have a good support network, certainly of healthcare professionals. Okay, journaling is great to get your emotions out there so that you can then articulate how you're feeling when you're speaking to somebody. Slowly but surely, and this is where it's really helpful to get the support of an eating disorder specialist around your nutrition, because it's not easy to make the changes that you need to, and also continuity is key. But it is very, very important to get back on track, slowly but surely, with the right support, eating all of the food groups and being gentle on yourself. It's not definite that fertility is going to be affected. There are higher risks, but the sooner you can overcome behaviour patterns, the more chance that you have got. Okay, I know lots of people who've had eating disorders who now have babies. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I would say once you are eating a healthy and balanced diet and you continue that for a period of time, once your periods return and are regular, then that's all your body showing you good signs of your fertility. One additional point that I would say is the concept of body image and your relationship with food can be really difficult in pregnancy, especially if you've had issues with that before. It can really cause a flare in symptoms. So just having the best support around you is really, really key. Being able to openly share your thoughts and your feelings, and maybe specialist advice during pregnancy around your diet, I think is really helpful.
Next question. There's a lot.
So I have a question. It's actually going back to what Alice said about when someone would approach her online asking her an advice in terms of what they're going through. So I have had myself, as it's cervical cancer awareness week, I have had some cervical abnormalities myself. I have been through some biopsies and some procedure. The thing is, I started using my platform to actually open up a little bit more about it, and I have been actually surprised how many women came to me asking questions about it, because they were actually so scared of having this, even the smear test, which basically takes 2 minutes of their time. And the main thing was because they felt ashamed of showing their intimate part to a doctor or nurse, really. And it kind of threw me, because I kind of felt like I actually, even if it's just 2 women going to that person, going to that nurse, having that smear test done, is a huge achievement. And the main thing also they've kind of said is we feel like there's not enough information out there, or we also feel like we may be judged if we're going to go for that smear test. So I'm basically trying to say to them that's not going to be the case, and if you feel really uncomfortable, tell that nurse, because they need to know how you feel. So what would be your advice if anyone like that would come and be a little bit uncomfortable with the way they need to do things?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Like I've seen a massive rise in lots of people with big platforms talking about smear tests and saying that they're going for them. And I think it's a really important conversation to have, because I think it's something that isn't spoken about enough, and because of that it did become a taboo subject. You know, it's never nice going and spreading your legs to the doctors to a complete stranger, let's just put it that way, but it's so important. And so if we can just kind of talk about it a bit more, you know, it's not this big procedure. Anyone who's had one knows it takes less than 10 minutes. It's also really important to note that the smear test doesn't actually check for cervical cancer, it checks for the HPV virus, which I think Brooke can probably talk about. But it also doesn't, and this is something that I learned recently, it doesn't check for all gynae cancers. So it's really important to just be aware of all of the symptoms down there, and that if anything feels different, just because you've gone and had a smear test doesn't mean that crosses you off from everything that might affect you. So I think just being clued up and feeling more comfortable to talk about changes in what happens down there is really, really important. And I think people like yourself using their platforms to kind of bust any myths and make women aware of the fact that it isn't as big a thing as they probably build it up to be in their heads. But I think you raised something which I think is so important, is just be vocal. You know, if you go and you feel uncomfortable, just in saying that in the initial moment, and finding a GP that you feel really comfortable with, or a doctor that you feel comfortable with, so that as soon as you go in there and say, look, I haven't had one before, or do you know what, I've had a really bad experience. I also know that people who've experienced sexual abuse or have been through really difficult things in that space find it even more uncomfortable. So I think being really vocal about how you feel and trying to be as open and vulnerable as possible will only make the process better, because hopefully the person that you're dealing with will be really responsive to your opening up, literally and metaphorically, but like will be really responsive to that. So I think it's really, really important that people like yourself are out there championing that message. You know, I had an amazing meeting with an ovarian cancer charity this week, and they're doing lots of stuff as well. So I think the more that we can talk about these things, they're not taboo, they're really, really important to talk about. And actually something like ovarian cancer has very few symptoms. So the more that women are aware of it, the more that, you know, people will hopefully catch these things earlier.
Definitely. Who had the question over here?
I was just going to ask, you mentioned about the pill, how it can take like a while for your periods to come back. What about the contraceptive implant that you get in your arm? So when you have that, what kind of the effects of your period?
Yeah, so the question was about the hormonal implant and how long that can take your periods to kind of regulate. I would divide all kind of contraception into the category of hormonal and non-hormonal, and most of the ones that come to mind, the pill, the implant, the injection, they all fall into the hormonal category, as well as the Mirena coil. And then your main non-hormonal options are condoms or the non-hormonal coil, which is the copper coil. All of the hormonal options essentially contain the same hormones. They all contain progesterone, and some of them contain just the pill contains estrogen as well. So essentially, broadly similar. Maybe the number of months might vary a little bit, and the implant will probably take a few extra months, but I would expect within a year you to start having periods again. And from when those restart, I would then give another kind of 6 months for them to become regular. However, if you're trying to conceive, and that's the reason you stopped your contraception, go for it anyway, because there's still a chance. You don't need to wait for your periods to become regular, and give it 6 months. If your periods aren't regular by 6 months, then see your doctor, because they can maybe do something to help with bringing your periods back quicker. If you're not trying to conceive, then you don't need to worry, just give it time.
There we go. We've got time for one more question. I'm not going to pick. Bee's going to pick.
I wanted to ask about autoimmune diseases. So I was reading yesterday that lupus, I think, affects like nine women versus 1 man for every 10 people. So what would you recommend from a dietitian perspective and a workout perspective for someone with an autoimmune disease, which is on the rise?
That's such a specific question. I wouldn't actually be able to give you an answer, because we treat everybody on an individual basis, and so we'll be looking at their bloods, their history running up to that. There is so much that goes on before you can actually give advice. So, not for you. So the first thing that we would do, we would look at we have, generally when it's an autoimmune condition, you're with a multidisciplinary team, so you're having, you've got everything in front of you. From that, you would then give your advice. So you'd be looking at their blood tests as well, see if there are any deficiencies specifically, and also you would be looking at them generally as well. You know, their eating behaviours, their eating patterns, to see if they're eating regularly, if there are any drug-nutrient interactions to do with their medications that they're taking. So depending on the information that you have, you would then base your advice from that. I don't know if you want to add to that.
Well, I think as with anything, there are specialists that we don't actually have an autoimmune expert on this panel right now to unfortunately answer your question, but as we've said, it's a very, very bespoke thing that takes a lot of thought and care, and I would steer clear of reading anything on the internet that you're reading, because there may be generic advice, but actually each individual case of everything in life is very different. So somebody could be suffering from one type of autoimmune condition and so could someone else, and it could be completely different. So it's very, very important. But I'm going to have to say a huge thank you to this amazing panel. What an intimate, incredible conversation.